Brooklyn, the crack era, 1980-something. A man is walking down the block, glasses on, regular clothes, nothing about him that announces what he is, no jewelry screaming his position, no entourage making the block part for him, no card pulling up that tells the neighborhood who just arrived. Just a man in glasses walking down a Brooklyn street. The dope boys see him coming, and they go the other way. Not because they recognize him as a threat, they recognize him as something worse. K-Sun, the man who looked like he belonged in a library and robbed the most dangerous men in Brooklyn like it was the most natural thing in the world. He would walk up on a dice game and take the whole pot. Who you going to call? The cops? He would rob a dealer, take the money, take the jewelry, take the product, give the product to his homies to knock off. Because selling was never his lane, taking was. He robbed dudes in clubs, in bathrooms, on dance floors. He waited outside parties and caught people slipping on their way to their cars. When celebrities came to town, they were the jackpot. He caught Buffy from the Fat Boys slipping, took his chain, and then because K-Sun was K-Sun, he made him say a rhyme while he had his chain. Okay, you got the man's chain, but did you really have to humiliate him? Yes. That was the point, the glasses, the regular appearance. The specific audacity of a man who looked like nobody and robbed everybody, that was K-Sun. And this is his story. K-Sun grew up in Tompkins projects in Brooklyn, the same projects where Big Unique was building his reputation, the same geography where two men from the same buildings could become two completely different kinds of dangerous. One the Stickup kid who terrorized the whole borough, one the enforcer whose name made real gangsters tuck their chains. K-Sun and Big Unique ran together. If you knew what Big Unique was into, you knew exactly what K-Sun was into. But where Big Unique carried himself with the specific gravity of a man whose reputation announced him before he arrived, K-Sun carried himself like nobody. And that was the most dangerous thing about him. He started the way most boys in that world started. Stealing bikes, shoplifting, taking things because the parents just did not have the luxury to afford what the neighborhood was wearing. The specific calculus of a kid who understands that the way to be fresh, to have the jacket, the sneakers, the specific uniform that mattered in Tompkins in the early 1980s was not to earn it, but to take it. He had to fight people for his own jacket, his own sneakers. If someone saw something on you that they wanted, you had to fight just to keep it. That was the specific economy of Tompkins in that era. You earned the right to keep what you had every single day. So he fought, and he was good at it. Fighting every day builds a specific kind of person, not just physically, mentally. The ability to stay calm when the situation escalates. The ability to calculate quickly when the math changes. The ability to make decisions in the fraction of a second that determines whether you go home or you do not. K-Sun was building all of that before he ever picked up a gun. And then he graduated. He and his crew started hitting suburban areas, home invasions, break-ins. They moved beyond the projects into the specific geography of outer Brooklyn, where houses had real money and real jewelry and real guns inside them. The suburbs that existed just outside the world K-Sun had grown up in, where families had accumulated the specific modest prosperity of working-class New York, were sitting there with their unlocked doors and their jewelry boxes and their cash that working men and women kept at home because they didn't trust banks. And K-Sun and his crew knew how to find all of it. That was when he found the .44 with the long nose, his first gun. When a gun gets into a certain kind of person's possession, it turns them out. It changes the specific calculation of every situation they find themselves in, not because they become reckless, but because the equation shifts completely. The threat you represent becomes undeniable. The conversations that used to require physical confrontation to resolve can now be resolved with one movement. K-Sun was already fearless. The gun made him something more. It made him a one-man industry. The crack era changed Brooklyn's underground economy overnight. Young hustlers were seeing more money than anyone in their neighborhoods had ever seen before. BMWs on corners where people used to walk. Jewelry that announced what men were before they opened their mouths. The specific visible wealth of the crack economy spread through Tompkins and across Brooklyn like a tide that nobody had predicted, and nobody fully understood until it was already everywhere. K-Sun looked at all of it. He looked at the dope boys with the BMWs, the Acuras, and the chains. He looked at the men who had been in his school, ordinary, soft, not particularly dangerous, and who had somehow found themselves on the right side of the crack economy's mathematics. He thought about it like this. Wait a minute. These are the same clowns I went to school with. Easy work. He started running down on cats, slapping them, taking their guns. And here is the specific humiliation that told you exactly what K-Sun was. Taking their gun was worse than taking their money. A man without his gun in that world is a man who has been publicly stripped of his authority, who has to answer questions he cannot answer, who has to look his crew in the eye and explain what happened. How are you going to get your gun taken? He walked up on dice games and cleared the whole pot. Not a single person in that circle was going to call the police. You do not call the police when you lose your dice game money to a stick-up kid in Brooklyn in 1980-something. You either take the loss or you go get it back. Most people took the loss. When he robbed dealers, he took everything. The cash, the jewelry, the product they were holding, and the product he didn't sell himself. He gave it to his homies to knock off because selling was never his lane. His lane was taking, and he was the best in Brooklyn at it. The gun collection grew. Every robbery produced more hardware. Every home invasion produced another weapon. Every dealer he ran down on contributed to the specific arsenal that K-Sun and his boys maintained. A collection so extensive that every morning he could go to that box, look through what was available, and pick whatever he wanted to carry that day. 38 revolver, fine. 357, also fine. The 44 long nose, his personal favorite. The specific weapon that had started everything. Every day, a different pistol. That is not the behavior of a man who is armed for self-defense. That is the behavior of a man who has built a business. The glasses. That detail matters more than anything else about K-Sun's story. In a world that ran on visual signals, where what you wore and how you moved and what you drove announced your position before you said a word, K-Sun wore glasses and looked like a regular person. Not regular in the Fritz sense of deliberately cultivating invisibility as a strategic choice. Regular in the specific way that makes men underestimate you before you've done anything to earn their attention. The dope boys who were tightening up their security, hiring muscle, adding enforcers, making their operations harder to penetrate, were looking for a specific kind of threat. They were looking for the man who looked like a stick-up kid, the man with the hard face, the man who moved with the specific body language of someone who had done violence before and was ready to do it again, the man whose presence made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up before he even looked at you. K-Sun did not look like that man. He looked like someone's accountant, with glasses. and a .44 long nose under his jacket. He walked through the most dangerous corners in Brooklyn, looking like he belonged to the legitimate world, looking like a man who had no business with the men on those corners, looking like someone who had wandered into the wrong neighborhood on his way somewhere else entirely. And then he ran down on them. The dope boys eventually started figuring out what they were dealing with. They tightened security, added muscle, made themselves harder targets, started moving in groups, started keeping their own men between themselves and the street. K-Sun didn't care. If you thought you were bad, he was going to challenge you. You had to show him. Not talk, show him. He went to war with killers over that philosophy. 7-minute shootouts, the specific extended gun battle that separates the men who can stay composed under sustained fire from the men who cannot. Holding his man down when the clip ran empty. Situations where most men would have recalculated and backed out. K-Sun never backed out. If you caught him without his gun, it still wasn't over, because he could fight, hands and feet. The specific combination of a man who had been fighting since he was a teenager, keeping his own jacket and sneakers, and who had honed that capability through the years, putting it on people on the street and behind bars. Multiple bids on Rikers Island. Every time he walked into a cell block, he was walking into a room full of men who might have been on the receiving end of his gun, men who had specific grievances, men who had been waiting for the opportunity to address what had happened to them in the specific privacy of a correctional facility where the normal rules of street engagement were replaced by a different set of rules entirely. He kept a banger regardless, and he stood on 10, meaning he never backed down, never looked for the easy exit, never positioned himself as someone who could be moved around. He went in as K-Sun, and he came out as K-Sun, every time. The information game was his most sophisticated weapon. K-Sun understood something that most stick-up kids never figured out. The most dangerous tool was not the gun. It was the conversation. He knew how to get the drop through a woman who was involved with his target, not through violence, not through threats, not through anything that would make the woman understand she was providing intelligence. Through a simple, casual conversation that most people would have had without giving it a second thought. Women unintentionally leak information. A casual exchange about someone they are seeing, where he lives, what car he drives, how he decorated his apartment. One conversation, he is like, "Yo, such and such got it going on. That's my man." Should she be like, "Oh, you know him?" He like, "Yeah, I love how he decked his crib out." She like, "Yeah, then 1 on 145th. Boom. There you go. All he had to do was ride around and find the car. Next thing you know, the target is tied up in his own apartment with guns in his face. And the woman did not even know she had provided the address. Did not even know the conversation she thought was innocent. Small talk had given K-Sun everything he needed to find her man's front door. He had no mercy for the men he found at those addresses. When celebrities came to Brooklyn, they were the jackpot. The specific wealth that entertainment produced in the 1980s, the chains, the jewelry, the specific visible prosperity of musicians who had come up from neighborhoods like his but had crossed into the legitimate economy. Those were K-Sun's favorite targets. They had the best jewelry, they had the highest profiles, and they had the specific vulnerability of men who were used to being celebrated rather than challenged. Buffy, from the Fat Boys, the hip-hop trio out of Brooklyn who had legitimate recording contracts and MTV videos, and the specific crossover success that made them national figures. Big guys, known faces, men whose visibility in the music world had translated into the kind of jewelry and status that made them targets in the world K-Sun occupied. K-Sun caught Buffy slipping, took his chain, then made him say a rhyme. Not because he needed the performance, because K-Sun was K-Sun. The specific humiliation was part of the work. Taking the chain was the job. Making the man say a rhyme while he had his chain was the signature. The specific calling card of a man who wanted everyone who heard the story afterward to know not just what had happened, but how it had happened. Okay, you got the man's chain, but did you really have to humiliate him? Yes, that was the point. You had to show people what you were. The lifestyle that the Stickup game produced for K-Sun looked like this: $10,000 cables around his neck, rented limousines to go out and have a ball. The specific pleasure of a man who had accumulated more than he needed, who had taken from so many people that the money had stopped being the point, and the taking itself had become the purpose, spending it the way a man spends money when he knows exactly how to replace it. He had so much jewelry that when he was arrested, someone had to come to the precinct specifically to pick it up. The police couldn't hold it all in a property bag. It was just too much for standard evidence processing. But don't let the fly fool you. He would tuck his chain in and get busy. The jewelry disappeared. The glasses were still on. And the man who looked like a regular person walking down the block was back. The transformation was instantaneous. One moment, K-Sun in limos with $10,000 cables. Next moment, a man in glasses who might work at the post office. That specific ability to move between identities, to be both the man with the cables and the man with the glasses, was what made him so difficult to defend against. The bulletproof vest went on every time he left his apartment. In the summertime, in the heat, uncomfortable, heavy, necessary. The specific calculus of a man who had done enough to enough people that the threat of retaliation was not abstract, it was imminent, constant, coming from multiple directions simultaneously. Because K-Sun knew exactly what he had done to how many people. And he knew that somewhere out there, in some apartment, on some corner, in some prison cell, there were men whose brothers he had robbed, whose cousins he had humiliated, whose own reputation had been damaged by what happened when they encountered K-Sun. All of them wanting revenge. He moved smart. He moved fast. Always looking like he was in a rush. Always shaking and moving. Always aware. The man who looked like an accountant moved through Brooklyn like a chess player who could see 6 moves ahead. 1988. K-Sun is in his apartment, 12th floor. He is with a woman, in his own space, the specific comfort of being where you live with people you trust. The 44 is not close by, not within immediate reach, because this is home. This is the place where you breathe differently, where the constant vigilance that the street demands can relax just slightly. He is comfortable. They came to his floor, not to the lobby, not to the building entrance, all the way to the 12th floor. The men who had finally calculated what everyone on Brooklyn's streets had already figured out, that you could not get K-Sun in the open. That the man in the glasses who moved too fast and too smart for anyone to catch him on the street had exactly one vulnerability: his comfort zone, the place where he let his guard down, his own apartment, on the 12th floor. They got him in his comfort zone. The specific viciousness of what happened on that floor told you everything about the level of anger that had been building in how many men, across how many years of being robbed and humiliated and having their reputation damaged by a man in glasses who looked like nobody. This was not a professional hit, not a quick, clean resolution of a business dispute. This was accumulated. This was the specific settling of accounts that had been building for years across dozens of men who each had their own reason. They even gave the woman a piece of the action, which tells you the specific nature of what this was. Kay's son was 23 years old, 23, a teenager during the crack era, running wild through Brooklyn in glasses, looking like nobody, robbing the most dangerous men in the borough for fun. Who did it? That question has never been answered, and here is why it never will. Kay's son had robbed so many people, had humiliated so many dope boys, taken so many chains, cleared so many dice games, broken into so many homes, caught so many celebrities slipping, that the list of men with a reason to want him dead was longer than any investigation could reasonably pursue. You are a stick-up kid. You did a lot of bad things to a lot of people. So it is kind of impossible to pinpoint where it came from, because there are a lot of people seeking revenge. That specific mathematics, the accumulated debt of years of robbing Brooklyn's most dangerous men, caught up to Kay's son on the 12th floor of his building, in his comfort zone, with a woman he trusted and a gun that wasn't close enough to reach. The man who had survived 7-minute shootouts, who had held his position when his man's clip ran empty, who had walked through the most dangerous corners in Brooklyn in glasses, looking like nobody, could not survive the people he let close enough to trust. Death comes with smiles and handshakes and hugs. Kay's son, the stick-up kid in glasses, the man who robbed Brooklyn's most dangerous dope boys for fun, the man who made Buffy from the Fat Boy say a rhyme, the man who cleared dice games and took product and gave the work to his homies because selling was never his lane. Found on the 12th floor, by people he trusted, in his own apartment.